It started like any other morning. A phone call, a quiet knock, a single envelope that would shatter everything Prince Harry thought he knew about his life, his family, and his children. 5 minutes ago, the world as he knew it shifted, and no one, not even the people closest to him, could have predicted the storm that was coming. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine sitting down to breakfast with your kids, Archie giggling over a toy, Lilibet reaching for her sippy cup, completely oblivious to the chaos that is about to unfold. Imagine holding that innocence in your hands, only to discover that the very foundations of your family could be a lie. This isn't a movie. This isn't a headline designed to shock for clicks. This is real. And for Harry, it was devastating. Just hours ago, he had believed in his family, in the love he shared with Meghan, and in the bond with his children. But the DNA results, sealed in a folder marked with the discreet insignia of a laboratory few even know exists, told a story that no one could have imagined. The numbers, the letters, the cold, unflinching facts. They screamed a truth Harry wasn't ready to face. Have you ever felt a moment where your world tilts on its axis in a heartbeat? That moment when time slows down, every second stretching into eternity, and you can't breathe because what you've just learned threatens everything you've ever trusted? That was Harry. That was him staring at the paper that could rewrite history. His personal history, the history of the monarchy, and the story of Archie and Lilibet forever. Now, you might be asking, why now? Why after all these years? The answer is as complicated as the royal family itself. The pressures, the hidden scandals, the betrayals behind palace doors, they all lead to moments like this. Moments where private secrets are thrust into the spotlight, and the entire world watches as a man grapples with truths too heavy to carry alone. But let's pause for a moment. Before we dive into the DNA results themselves, let's set the stage. Prince Harry is no stranger to public scrutiny. From the day he stepped into the limelight as a young boy at Princess Diana's side, to his military service, to every interview he's ever given with Meghan, he has lived under a microscope. Yet, no camera, no journalist, no public opinion could prepare him for what these results revealed. Because this was not about politics, not about public perception. It was about the most sacred thing anyone can experience, family. And here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Because this isn't just about Harry's reaction. It's about Meghan's response, the whispers behind palace walls, the lawyers preparing statements, and the global audience already forming opinions before Harry has even had a chance to process it himself. It's about the delicate balance between protecting your children and navigating the consequences of a revelation that could trigger a media firestorm unlike anything the monarchy has seen in decades. Have you ever wondered how someone reacts when faced with betrayal on such a personal level? Not betrayal in business, not betrayal in friendship, but betrayal that cuts straight to the heart, to the very essence of trust and love. That's where we begin to understand the weight Harry is carrying. The kind of weight that keeps you awake at night, that makes breakfast taste like ashes, that makes you question every decision you've ever made. In these opening moments, you start to see the complexity. The media wants a scandal. The public wants drama. But the truth, the human truth, is far messier. It's the confusion, the hurt, the disbelief. It's Harry pacing in his private room, phone in hand, trying to figure out how to tell Meghan, how to hold his children, how to survive a revelation that could redefine their lives forever. And yet, there's more. Because as shocking as the DNA results are, the timing of their revelation adds a layer of urgency that makes this story even more compelling. 5 minutes ago, Harry held the paper. 5 minutes ago, everything changed. And in that tiny window of time, the world didn't know it yet, but the consequences were already unfolding. Social media notifications began to ping, journalists began to sense a storm, and loyalists within the palace began whispering about how to contain the damage. But containment may already be impossible. Now, imagine yourself in Harry's shoes. You are a prince, but not just a figurehead. You are a husband, a father, a man who has dedicated his life to family and service. And suddenly, you are hit with the most personal of shocks. Questions flood your mind. Could this really be true? How could this happen? What does it mean for Archie, for Lilibet, for Meghan? And most terrifying of all, how will the world react when they find out? This story matters not because it's scandalous, though it absolutely is, but because it speaks to something deeper, to the universal fear of betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the raw human emotion that none of us are prepared to handle when our world is suddenly upended. And in this very moment, as Harry sat with that envelope, the air heavy with anticipation and dread, one thing became abundantly clear: nothing would ever be the same again. And yet, here's the twist that makes you stop and lean in closer. This revelation, while deeply personal, has implications far beyond one family. It reaches into the public consciousness, the monarchy, and the very nature of what we believe about love, lineage, and loyalty. The consequences ripple outwards, touching everyone who has ever followed Harry's life. The interviews, the charity work, the struggles with mental health. All of it gains a new, almost unbearable weight under this new light. It was a morning like any other in the quiet corners of Montecito, California. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting warm streaks across the living room where Prince Harry sat with Archie and Lilibet. The air smelled faintly of coffee and baby powder, a domestic normalcy that felt worlds away from the flashing cameras, royal protocols, and relentless scrutiny he had endured for decades. And yet, for all the calm, an undercurrent of tension existed, a tension invisible to anyone outside these walls but palpable to Harry, a tension that would explode in the most unimaginable way in mere minutes. Imagine it: Archie giggling over a toy car, wheels spinning across the carpet as he chattered about a fantastical world of superheroes and dragons. Lilibet, barely 2, toddling around with the clumsy determination of someone exploring her universe for the first time. And Harry, trying to anchor himself, savoring these moments of laughter and innocence, these rare moments where the past, the palace, and the public gaze felt distant. But Harry knew that calm is always fleeting. He had spent years understanding it, learning to recognize the quiet before a storm. Whether it was the relentless media coverage in London or the whispered intrigues of palace corridors, he had come to expect that peace was always temporary. And on this morning, the calm was deceiving. He looked at Meghan, who was busy preparing breakfast, a serene smile masking the constant calculation and vigilance that had become second nature to her. She had learned the hard way that in their world, nothing was ever just what it seemed. Every glance, every word, every gesture carried meaning, nuance, and the potential for misinterpretation. Harry watched her, grateful for her presence, for the anchor she provided, even as a quiet sense of unease gnawed at the edges of his mind. It began with a simple sound, the soft chime of the doorbell. A courier, unassuming, carrying something that would upend the fragile equilibrium of the day. Harry's instincts sharpened instantly. His military training, the years of handling high-pressure situations, kicked in. This was no ordinary delivery. Something about the way the courier lingered, glancing around nervously, told him that whatever they carried was far from mundane. He rose from the couch, Archie clinging to his leg, and opened the door. The envelope was plain, brown, nondescript, yet the weight of it seemed to press against his palms, a tangible burden he hadn't anticipated. There was no note, no fanfare, nothing to soften the impact. Only the sterile formality of a document that could, in a single moment, dismantle the foundation of his family. Harry felt a chill, a flash of disbelief that was quickly replaced by a tightening knot in his chest. He excused the courier, who left with an almost imperceptible shuffle, and closed the door. For a brief second, he simply stood there, staring at the envelope as if it were a living entity, pulsating with secrets, demanding his attention. Archie, oblivious to the tension, tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can you play with me?" The innocence in the child's voice was almost painful. Harry forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing within. "Of course, buddy. Right after breakfast." But even as he spoke, he knew that the next few minutes would irrevocably change everything. He sat down at the kitchen table, envelope in hand, trying to steady himself. The world outside continued unaware, the ocean breeze drifting through open windows, birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic. Yet inside, Harry felt a quiet panic, a sense of impending doom that gnawed at him relentlessly. How could a single piece of paper hold the power to shatter his world so completely? And more importantly, How would he process what he was about to learn? Harry hesitated, fingers brushing the flap of the envelope. His mind raced through scenarios, possibilities ranging from mundane to catastrophic. Could it be a mistake, a prank, or worse, a truth that he had feared but never dared to imagine? For a moment, he let himself linger in denial, clinging to the hope that this would all be trivial, insignificant, something he could dismiss with a laugh. But deep down, he knew better. Intuition, honed over years of navigating crises, whispered a grim warning. This was no ordinary letter. Megan watched him from across the room, her expression unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and concern. She had learned early on to read the subtle signs, the tiny shifts in body language that betrayed inner turmoil. And now, she saw it, the tightness in Harry's jaw, the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he held the envelope. A silent understanding passed between them. Something monumental had just arrived, and their world was about to be forced into a confrontation they had long anticipated but never expected to occur so abruptly. Harry opened the envelope, careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic in his movements. Inside were the documents, the DNA results, clinical in presentation, sterile in their authority, unflinching in their implications. He felt his pulse quicken, a sudden, almost violent thrum in his chest that made his vision narrow, his breathing shallow. The numbers, the percentages, the codes, each a brutal confirmation that the life he thought he knew might have been built on assumptions, not truths. For a moment, Harry could not read. He simply stared, paralyzed by disbelief. How could this be? How could the most sacred bonds, the love he had fought to protect, be questioned by a simple test? His mind raced, bouncing between denial and panic, hope and despair, until reality began to press down on him with unbearable weight. Archie reached for his hand, breaking through the haze of shock. "Daddy." The simplicity of the word, the trust implicit in a child's gaze, struck Harry like a hammer. Here was innocence, untouched by scandal, unaware of betrayal. And Harry, suddenly, felt the crushing responsibility of having to protect that innocence, even as the ground beneath him shifted violently. Megan came closer, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever it says, we face it together," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but Harry could detect the tension beneath. There was strategy, yes, but also fear, recognition of the storm that this revelation would unleash beyond these walls. He nodded, grateful for her presence, and yet, the chill of uncertainty remained, a silent reminder that nothing would ever be simple again. Outside, the world continued in blissful ignorance, but within these walls, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anxiety and anticipation. Every second stretched, every heartbeat echoed loudly, until the silence itself seemed oppressive, waiting for the moment when Harry would confront the truth, fully and unflinchingly. And in that quiet, suspended moment, the question formed: how does a man reconcile the love for his children with a revelation that challenges the very foundation of their identity? How does a father process the unthinkable, knowing that his reaction could define the lives of Archie and Lilibet forever? The calm had ended. The storm was imminent. And Harry, despite every preparation, every experience, every lesson in resilience, knew that he was about to face a truth that could shatter everything he held dear. The phone rang just as Harry was trying to steady himself. At first, he hesitated, staring at the device as if it were an instrument of fate itself. Every ring felt louder than the last, a drumbeat echoing the panic that had already begun to settle into his chest. Megan, sensing the tension, stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm, grounding him even as his mind raced. "It's probably nothing," she said, but Harry knew better. In their world, nothing ever arrived as nothing. He answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost clinical, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. No pleasantries, no soft introductions, just a single, chilling line. "Prince Harry, we have the results you requested." Time seemed to stop. Harry gripped the phone tighter, every instinct screaming at him to prepare for the worst. His eyes flicked to Megan, who nodded imperceptibly, silently telling him to listen, to absorb, to remain composed. But even the steely calm they had cultivated over the years was no match for the words that followed. You need to know the truth about your children. The voice continued, cold and unyielding. The results confirm that Archie and Lilibet are not biologically yours. For a fraction of a second, Harry couldn't process it. The words hung in the air, absurd, impossible, wrong. He blinked, unable to respond, as if the act of speaking might somehow shatter reality further. Megan's grip on his arm tightened, her eyes wide but steady, as if silently communicating, "We'll get through this." "Excuse me." Harry finally managed, his voice breaking slightly, disbelief seeping through the carefully controlled exterior he had maintained for so long. "It's all here," the voice said. "Everything you need to know is in the report. The DNA doesn't lie." Harry felt the room tilt. The floor seemed to shift beneath him, the walls closing in. He gripped the edge of the table to anchor himself, to hold onto something tangible while his world unraveled. Archie's laughter from the living room, once a balm, now felt almost surreal, like a cruel reminder of innocence existing in a space where betrayal had quietly crept in. He ended the call, the weight of the words pressing on him like a physical force. Silence followed, dense and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the soft gurgles of Lilibet in her high chair. Harry's mind raced, a storm of questions and accusations, none of which had answers. How could this be possible? Was there a mistake? Could someone have tampered with the results? Megan placed the envelope, the same one he had hesitated to open, on the table between them. "It's all there," she said again, her tone measured, almost a lifeline in the chaos. "We need to look. We need to understand it." Harry nodded, swallowing hard. He reached for the envelope, feeling its weight, both literal and metaphorical. He pulled out the papers and began to read. The clinical format, the sterile scientific language, made the truth even more jarring. Percentages, allele matches, control markers, numbers and letters coldly asserting a reality Harry had never imagined. With each line, the room seemed to shrink, the air grow heavier, and the laughter of his children became a haunting echo of normalcy that might never be regained. His first reaction was denial. This can't be real, he thought. There must be an error. He traced the lab stamp with his finger, scrutinizing every detail, looking for any sign of tampering, any clue that this nightmare could be reversed. But the data was clear, clinical, unmistakable. Archie and Lilibet, the two little lives that had defined his world since birth, were not biologically his. Questions cascaded in a torrent of disbelief. How long had this been the case? Who else knew? What did this mean for his marriage, for his family, for the very identity of his children? And perhaps most frightening of all, how would the world react once this information inevitably leaked? Megan's hand found his again, grounding him. "We deal with this together," she said, her voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. "We protect the children. We protect ourselves. But we cannot ignore it." Harry nodded again, swallowing the lump in his throat. His mind began to shift from disbelief to strategy. The truth, as devastating as it was, demanded action. And yet, every step forward seemed to carry the weight of the world. Every decision had ramifications that stretched far beyond the confines of their home. Then came the calls from advisors, lawyers, and aides who had been quietly monitoring the situation for weeks, anticipating complications even Harry had not considered. Each ring, each voice, brought with it more questions than answers, more pressure than relief. The outside world had no idea what was unfolding within these walls. They would soon know, and when they did, there would be no turning back. Harry's thoughts turned to his children. Archie, with his endless curiosity and boundless energy. Lilibet, with her shy smiles and tiny hands reaching for the world. How could he reconcile this revelation with the love he felt? How could he hold them, protect them, and navigate a truth that might redefine everything he had believed about fatherhood? The morning dragged on, each second stretching into eternity. Harry reread the results, hoping that repetition might soften the blow. But with every line, every clinical assertion, the reality became undeniable. The calm of the morning was gone. The storm, which had been silently brewing for years, had finally broken. And yet, even as panic threatened to overwhelm him, a spark of clarity emerged. He needed to think, to plan, to anticipate. The world was about to be forced into confrontation with a secret that would ignite media frenzy, royal conflict, and personal turmoil of unimaginable magnitude. And Harry, despite the devastation, knew that he had to prepare for what was coming, even if it terrified him. Because in this life, in this moment, there was no undoing the truth. There was only the path forward, and that path was about to take Harry into territory he had never imagined. But what came next would shatter every assumption he had about loyalty, trust, and family, and no one, not even Meghan, could have prepared him for the storm that was coming. Harry sat in stunned silence. The envelope opened before him. Papers spread across the table like a battlefield of numbers and cold, unflinching science. The DNA report stared back at him with clinical precision, each percentage and marker a devastating confirmation of what he had only begun to suspect during that agonizing phone call. Archie and Lilibet, his children, his legacy, were not biologically his. The words themselves seemed almost surreal, impossible, yet the proof was undeniable. Imagine the moment, your entire identity, your fatherhood, your understanding of family, questioned by a piece of paper. A piece of paper with ink, numbers, and a laboratory stamp. No opinion, no bias, no room for negotiation. Just truth, or at least, the truth according to science. And for Harry, it was a truth that pierced him deeper than any headline, any scandal, any palace intrigue ever could. The first reaction was disbelief. He read the lines again, hoping, praying, that there had been an error, a misprint, a miscalculation, a test switched with someone else. But the numbers did not lie. The alleles, the genetic markers, the percentages, everything pointed to the same devastating conclusion. Archie and Lilibet were not biologically his. The second reaction was rage. Not at Meghan, not at first, but at the cruel randomness of life, at the universe for handing him this reality, at the secrets and betrayals hidden in plain sight. How could this happen? How could the world allow such a thing to come to light in a moment so public, so irreversible? His fists clenched on the table, knuckles whitening, as he wrestled with the injustice of it all. And then came despair. The hollow, crushing despair of a man forced to question everything he had built his life around. Fatherhood is not just biology. It is love, care, sacrifice. But the mind cannot help fixating on the numbers, on the undeniable proof that his body had not contributed to the lives of the children he adored. How could he reconcile the love he felt with the science before him? How could he tell himself that everything he had done for Archie and Lilibet, every sleepless night, every scraped knee, every lullaby, was still real, still meaningful, when the very essence of their being seemed to lie outside him? Questions flooded him relentlessly. Had there been a mistake? Was there some mix-up in the lab? Could the results be tampered with? But even as hope flared faintly, rationality and fear quickly doused it. The documentation was too thorough, too precise, the procedures meticulous. No casual error could explain this. No simple oversight. He glanced at Meghan, whose face was calm but unreadable, the quiet steel she had always wielded in public moments now an anchor for him. Her eyes met his, conveying a mix of fear, empathy, and determination. She had known, perhaps suspected, or at least anticipated that a truth of this magnitude could emerge. And yet, even she seemed momentarily unmoored, as if the implications reached further than even she had calculated. "Harry," she said softly, breaking the tense silence, "we need to think. We need to plan. But first, we need to understand this. All of it." He nodded numbly, realizing that there was no turning back. The numbers were immutable, the science indisputable, and the reality unavoidable. Yet amidst the devastation, a flicker of resolve appeared. He had survived public scrutiny, relentless media attacks, and the relentless machinery of the monarchy. He could survive this too, but it would require clarity, strategy, and courage unlike anything he had ever summoned before. As he reread the report, the details sank in further, each line a hammer driving home the truth. The markers, the haplotypes, the genetic probabilities, they were absolute. Archie and Lilibet's biological parentage did not include him. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. And yet, amidst the science, Harry could still feel the pulse of his love for them, the bond that had formed through years of care, sacrifice, and devotion. Biology could not erase that, but it did challenge the very story he had told himself, the foundation of his identity as a father. Suddenly, a memory flashed unbidden across his mind. Years of small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies. Moments he had dismissed, conversations that now seemed loaded with double meaning, and whispers that had seemed insignificant at the time. It all clicked into a pattern, terrifying in its clarity. What he had brushed off as coincidence or stress was now terrifyingly real. The implications were immense. This was not just a personal revelation. This was a matter that could destabilize public perception, media narratives, and even the monarchy itself. Social media would erupt, tabloids would run rampant, and public opinion, always fickle, always ready to consume scandal, would demand answers. And in the middle of it all, Harry had to navigate the truth, protect his children, and preserve the delicate threads of his life that still mattered. Yet, even in despair, Harry's strategic mind began to work. He considered the options. Verify the results with another lab, control the narrative before leaks occurred, protect the children from exposure, and manage Meghan's reactions. Each decision carried weight. Each choice could be interpreted, misinterpreted, or weaponized. The pressure was immense, suffocating even, but there was no alternative. The truth had been revealed, and it demanded action. And then came the deepest cut of all, the human, emotional reality beyond the science. Despite the DNA evidence, the love Harry felt for Archie and Lilibet did not diminish. The bond was real, forged in sleepless nights, in laughter, in fear, in joy. But the knowledge that their lives were intertwined with a truth he had never anticipated added a layer of vulnerability that left him exposed in a way that nothing else had ever managed. He looked at the children playing in the next room, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding them. Their laughter, their innocence, was a stark contrast to the storm raging in Harry's mind. How could he shield them from the fallout? How could he navigate a world in which every glance, every public appearance, every interaction could be scrutinized and twisted against him? Meghan's hand found his once more. "We face it together," she said again, this time with a fierceness that matched the intensity of the revelation. "But Harry, you need to understand, we have to prepare. Because once this gets out, there's no turning back." And he knew she was right. The truth was no longer private. It had leaked into reality the moment he held that report. And from here, every step would be a negotiation between love, loyalty, and survival. Harry, who had faced the world countless times, realized that this was different. This was personal, intimate, devastating, and utterly irreversible. He drew a deep breath, trying to steady the shaking that had begun to consume him. The numbers had spoken. The DNA results had shattered the illusion of certainty he had clung to for years. And in that silence, punctuated only by the distant, innocent laughter of his children, Harry understood the full magnitude of what had just occurred. The revelation was absolute. The consequences would be vast, and the path forward would demand every ounce of resilience, cunning, and emotional strength he could muster. Meghan watched Harry with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and determination. She had anticipated challenges, expected scrutiny, and braced herself for the pressures that came with being married to a prince whose life was perpetually under the world's microscope. But even she had not prepared for this moment. The DNA results lay on the table, between them like a silent predator, reshaping reality in ways neither of them could have foreseen. She had seen the disbelief in Harry's eyes. The moment when rationality collides with devastation. The denial, the anger, the despair, all in a single, unbroken chain of emotion. Meghan knew, instinctively, that how she responded in this moment would define the next steps, not just for Harry, but for their family, their children, and the fragile equilibrium of their lives in the public eye. At first, she considered staying silent, letting Harry navigate the shock alone. Let him read, process, breathe. But she quickly realized that silence in this context could be deadly. Silence could allow doubt to fester, fear to take root, and the storm outside these walls to enter unchallenged. She had to act. She had to speak. "Harry," she began softly, her voice steady, almost impossibly calm given the chaos. We need to process this together, but we also need to think carefully, strategically, emotionally. Every move matters now. Harry's eyes, still wide with disbelief, searched hers. The raw vulnerability in his gaze met the strength she projected, and for a fleeting moment, the two of them existed in a fragile bubble where only truth and love mattered. But that bubble was about to be pierced by the realities of the outside world. Meghan's mind raced. She thought of the media frenzy that would erupt, the tabloids that would twist every word and action into fuel for public consumption. She imagined headlines screaming betrayal, scandal, and deception. She knew the royal family would respond, or more accurately, they would react, and their reaction could exacerbate the pain, manipulate the narrative, and turn the situation into a global spectacle. Yet, amid the swirling storm, she also considered the children. Archie and Lilibet were blissfully unaware, but Meghan knew that innocence was fragile. Protecting them would require a delicate balance of truth, shielding, and emotional honesty. She had to consider, how do you preserve childhood when the foundation of family, the story of parentage itself, is being questioned? Her first step was to ground Harry, to provide a framework through which he could begin to think. We need to understand exactly what these results mean, she said. Not just scientifically, but legally, emotionally, and publicly. Every angle must be considered. Harry nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. Meghan reached across the table, taking his hand in hers, a gesture of solidarity and reassurance. She could feel his tension, his panic, his need for guidance, and she knew that she had to be both partner and strategist. Then came the emotional confrontation, one Meghan had been bracing for, even as she maintained composure. She asked the questions that no one else would dare to voice, questions that cut to the heart of the revelation. Harry, she said, how do you feel, truly? Not as a prince, not as a husband, but as a father. Harry's voice faltered. I don't know, he admitted, the raw honesty startling in its vulnerability. I love them. I always have. But I don't understand. How could this be? How could it be real? Meghan squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. Together. But we must be careful. Every step, every word, every decision could have consequences far beyond what we can imagine. Her mind raced ahead, considering all possibilities. Should they seek a second opinion? How soon should they go public, if at all? What about the royal family? How would they respond to news that could potentially shake their image and influence? How would the world react to the idea that a prince, someone whose life is so scrutinized, so public, could face such a deeply personal betrayal? She also considered the personal, the human implications. Could Harry forgive? Could they navigate this new reality without allowing resentment, doubt, or anger to destroy the fragile foundation of trust between them? Could they maintain the love that had carried them through scrutiny, exile, and media attacks, now under the weight of a revelation that challenged everything they knew about family? Then there was the question of timing. Meghan knew that acting too quickly could be as dangerous as doing nothing. The world moves fast, and the media even faster. Any misstep could be amplified, misinterpreted, weaponized. But waiting too long could allow rumors to grow, speculation to dominate, and the narrative to escape their control entirely. And yet, amidst the strategy, Meghan felt the full, human weight of the situation. It wasn't just about politics, media, or public perception. It was about love, loyalty, and the protection of innocence. It was about ensuring that Archie and Lilibet, regardless of the biology revealed in a lab report, continued to feel safe, loved, and secure. That knowledge, even as the shock of betrayal lingered, gave her a singular focus: protect the children, support Harry, and navigate the storm with clarity and courage. She could see the conflict raging within Harry, the juxtaposition of unconditional love and stark scientific reality. He wanted to deny it, to dismiss it, to protect himself from the crushing truth. But Meghan's presence, her calm determination, reminded him that they were stronger together, that love and strategy could coexist even in moments of unimaginable devastation. Yet, even as she reassured him, Meghan was acutely aware of the wider implications. This revelation, while profoundly personal, would inevitably leak beyond the walls of their home. The media, the royal family, social networks. All would become instruments in a story that was now unavoidable. And navigating that world required more than courage. It required precision, foresight, and the ability to anticipate moves that could shape the trajectory of their lives forever. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and finally said, "We need to plan our next move. Carefully. But we also need to prepare for the emotional reality. Because, Harry, this isn't just numbers on paper. This is a life-altering moment. And we cannot ignore the human cost of what this revelation will bring." Harry looked at her, drawing strength from her unwavering presence. The storm was coming, but in that moment, Meghan provided a lifeline. Not a solution, not yet, but a guide through the emotional labyrinth that now lay ahead. He realized that the truth, as painful as it was, would not define him. How he responded to it would. And in that moment, even as uncertainty loomed and the DNA results burned like a silent accusation, Harry understood one immutable fact: nothing would ever be the same again. But what came next would push them both to the edge, and the world outside would begin to sense the first tremors of a scandal unlike anything the monarchy had faced in decades. The palace corridors were quiet, but silence rarely meant peace. In the royal world, silence often signals the opposite. A storm gathering behind closed doors, whispers spreading like wildfire, loyalties tested, and alliances forming in shadows. And in this case, the storm had already begun, long before Harry held the DNA report in his hands. By the time the news reached Buckingham Palace, Harry and Meghan's world had already shifted. The results were a powder keg, and the royal family was scrambling to understand the implications, both publicly and privately. Courtiers, advisors, and aides exchanged hushed conversations, each trying to gauge how the fallout would affect the monarchy's image, influence, and stability. This was no ordinary scandal. It was a personal revelation with the potential to ripple outward and ignite global scrutiny. At first, there was disbelief. How could a prince, a direct heir of one of the most scrutinized families in the world, face such a personal upheaval? Questions flooded the minds of palace insiders. Was the report legitimate? Could it be contested? What were the legal implications for succession, inheritance, and custody? And most importantly, how could this information be contained, managed, or spun to minimize damage? Yet the disbelief quickly gave way to tension. Every family member had a stake in the outcome, and every move would be interpreted through the lens of power, legacy, and public perception. Queen Elizabeth, ever the figure of measured authority, reportedly expressed concern about the emotional toll on Harry and Meghan, but also about the ripple effects this revelation could have on the monarchy's carefully curated image. Prince Charles, long under scrutiny himself, began weighing the implications for his own reputation, the public narrative surrounding his son, and the delicate balance between family loyalty and royal duty. The whispers, once confined to private corridors, began to spread. Senior advisors debated strategy, while junior staff feared being caught in the crossfire of one of the most explosive potential scandals in decades. Conversations were clipped, coded, and cautious. Every word, every glance, every interaction was measured against the possibility of leaks, misinterpretation, or betrayal. The tension was palpable, a pressure cooker ready to explode. Meanwhile, the media, always hungry for intrigue, sensed a shift. Insiders, no matter how loyal, began to hint at something brewing behind palace walls. Rumors circulated, some true, some fabricated, but each carried the potential to fan the flames of public outrage. Headlines would soon scream betrayal and scandal, but within the palace, the atmosphere was dominated by silent calculation and suppressed panic. Harry's position was precarious. On one hand, he was the victim of deeply personal revelations. On the other, he remained a prince, a public figure whose every move could have diplomatic, cultural, and media ramifications. Advisors counseled caution, suggesting he verify the results independently, manage his public appearances, and carefully craft statements to control narrative. Every suggestion carried weight, every delay risked exposure. Yet for Harry, the royal family tensions were more than strategic concerns. They were emotional landmines. He remembered past conflicts, subtle betrayals, and the simmering resentments that had occasionally bubbled to the surface. The relationship with his father, already strained, became more complicated. How would Charles react to news that could potentially redefine Harry's identity as a father and undermine his position in the family hierarchy? How would William respond, given the media scrutiny he himself faced? And how could Harry navigate loyalty to family while protecting the truth of his own life? Complicating matters further was Meghan's position. Loyal, supportive, and fiercely protective, she had her own calculus to make. How could she shield her children while simultaneously navigating a royal structure designed to absorb and deflect scandal? How could she manage the delicate dance of family loyalty, public expectation, and personal survival, all while helping Harry process a revelation that could have shattered anyone's composure? The tension within the palace was mirrored outside, in the quiet hum of social media alerts, investigative journalists preparing to dig into past events, and insiders ready to leak anything that could advance their position or gain leverage. Every whisper, every assumption, every speculative conversation had the potential to become a global story. The palace, for all its tradition and protocol, was suddenly at the mercy of information that could not be contained. Harry, meanwhile, wrestled with conflicting emotions. He wanted clarity, resolution, and answers. But clarity brought its own pain. Resolution carried its own consequences, and answers were elusive, complicated by loyalty, secrecy, and history. The royal family, once a source of identity and security, now represented an intricate web of tension, expectation, and potential betrayal. For Meghan, the media frenzy presented an equally complex challenge. She needed to remain composed for the children, strategic for public perception, and supportive for Harry, all while processing her own shock and anger. Every reaction, every expression, every gesture could be interpreted, sensationalized, and weaponized. The intensity of scrutiny was unlike anything they had faced before, and yet they had no choice but to navigate it with careful precision. The frenzy also had secondary effects. Friends, allies, and distant acquaintances were suddenly in contact, offering opinions, advice, and support, or sometimes leveraging the chaos for their own gain. The ripple effect of the revelation reached far beyond the immediate family, drawing in a network of individuals, institutions, and media entities who were all invested in the outcome. And while the public debated, judged, and speculated, Harry and Meghan had to make immediate, critical decisions. How to protect their children, how to respond to palace pressure, and how to manage a narrative that had already taken on a life of its own. Every delay was noticed, every step scrutinized, and every miscalculation magnified by millions of eyes worldwide. The emotional toll was immense. Harry's mind oscillated between grief, anger, and protective instinct, while Meghan worked to maintain composure, shield the children, and plan the next steps. Sleep became elusive, every moment charged with anxiety, and every sound, phone alerts, notifications, distant helicopters, reminded them that the world outside had invaded their private lives. Yet even amidst the chaos, one truth remained. The media frenzy was unstoppable. Once the revelation had leaked, once the world knew, there was no retreat. Every subsequent action would be interpreted, scrutinized, and potentially distorted. The storm had begun, and it was relentless, global, and merciless. And as the frenzy intensified, Harry realized that survival would not be a matter of hiding or denial. It would be a battle of strategy, endurance, and emotional resilience. Every choice mattered. Every word could ignite the fire further, and every decision could alter not just the public perception of him, but the very reality of his family's life going forward. But what came next would push Harry and Meghan into an uncharted arena of confrontation, where loyalty, truth, and public scrutiny collided in ways neither of them could have imagined. The world reacted instantly. News outlets had already released breaking headlines, but the full weight of the DNA revelation had barely begun to settle. Social media, forums, and comment sections became battlegrounds of opinion, speculation, and outrage. Millions weighed in, each reaction a reflection of emotion, bias, and curiosity. This was not a story that could be contained. It had leapt from the private envelope in Harry's hands into every home, phone, and conversation across the globe. The reactions were polarized. Some expressed empathy, recognizing the human tragedy beneath the sensationalism. How do you process such a revelation? One user posted. This is heartbreaking for the children and for Harry and Meghan. Another wrote, no matter biology, love makes a parent. I hope the media remembers that. These voices, compassionate yet overwhelmed, reflected a portion of the public struggling to see past the headlines. But there was another, far louder reaction: mockery, speculation, and blame. Memes proliferated within minutes, some cruel, some ironic, all designed to provoke reaction and engagement. Commenters debated who might be responsible, what this meant for the monarchy, and how it could alter the narrative of Harry and Meghan's lives. Within hours, hashtags were trending worldwide, each iteration framing the story as scandalous, dramatic, and controversial. Television networks and online news portals capitalized on the frenzy. Panel discussions analyzed every detail, breaking down the DNA report in ways that bordered on voyeurism. Experts weighed in. Geneticists explained the science, royal commentators debated protocol, and media analysts speculated on the ripple effects. Every angle, every perspective, was dissected, amplified, and broadcast to an audience hungry for drama. In households around the world, viewers debated morality, loyalty, and parenthood. Late-night talk shows turned the revelation into commentary, blending humor, sarcasm, and critique in ways that further entrenched public perception. Even casual conversations in offices, cafes, and social gatherings referenced the story, turning it into a collective obsession that extended far beyond traditional media. The frenzy also reignited debates about privacy, media ethics, and celebrity culture. Was it right to expose such personal information? Could the children be shielded from the public eye? Discussions about consent, protection, and responsibility became central to the narrative, reflecting a society grappling with the consequences of immediate global exposure. Yet even these debates could not slow the spread of misinformation, exaggeration, and rumor. In Harry and Meghan's immediate circles, reactions mirrored the public's complexity. Friends, acquaintances, and allies responded with support, shock, and caution. Messages of solidarity poured in, tempered by advice on media strategy and personal protection. Yet some voices, more distant or opportunistic, saw the revelation as a moment to leverage influence, extract favors, or manipulate perception for personal gain. Trust, already strained, became even more fragile. The couple had to confront an uncomfortable reality. The world's fascination with the story meant they could not simply grieve privately. Every statement, every gesture, and every moment of silence would be scrutinized, dissected, and amplified. Emotional authenticity was expected, yet even genuine reactions risked misinterpretation. How could they navigate the global eye without further endangering their family or themselves? Public reactions were not limited to speculation and debate. They began shaping behavior. Security concerns escalated, travel plans were adjusted, and social media monitoring intensified. Paparazzi activity increased exponentially, each image and video captured feeding the relentless narrative. The digital and physical invasion of their lives created a sense of constant surveillance, where safety and privacy were fragile illusions. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan faced the dual burden of managing the children and the narrative. They could not escape the public gaze, but they could attempt to control it. Every move became tactical. Outings were carefully planned, statements were crafted with precision, and emotional moments were shared selectively to convey humanity without fueling the frenzy. It was a delicate, exhausting dance between authenticity and strategy. Even the philanthropic and public commitments they maintained were now reframed. Acts of charity, appearances, and public statements were analyzed through the lens of scandal. Could they continue advocacy work without it being perceived as distraction or spin? Could they maintain personal integrity while under constant scrutiny? The pressure was unrelenting, and the stakes had never been higher. The public's reaction also amplified internal family tensions. Messages, leaks, and speculations reaching Buckingham Palace added another layer of pressure, where the need to maintain appearances clashed with the desire to protect individual family members. Royal aides, advisors, and courtiers navigated an increasingly complex web of expectation, loyalty, and scrutiny. Every whisper and rumor became a potential headline, forcing reactions that were both measured and strategically calculated. Through it all, Harry and Meghan held on to one guiding principle: protect the children. Archie and Lilibet were blissfully unaware of the magnitude of the global attention their family had just drawn. Their innocence became a shield, a motivating force that guided decisions even as emotional exhaustion and fear threatened to dominate. Every choice, every step, every carefully worded response was driven by the necessity to preserve childhood, safety, and emotional stability. Yet, even with this focus, the couple understood an unavoidable truth. Public reactions were not going to subside quickly. The fascination, outrage, and curiosity were only beginning. The global conversation was relentless, and the story was far from over. Every day would bring new challenges, new leaks, new interpretations, and new emotional burdens. And as Harry and Meghan navigated the unrelenting public gaze, they realized that the story had evolved. What began as a private, devastating revelation was now a global spectacle, a test of resilience, strategy, and emotional endurance. Every interaction, every public statement, every moment of silence had consequences, shaping perception and influencing the trajectory of their family's life forever. But what came next would escalate the situation beyond imagination, pushing palace politics, media frenzy, and family loyalty into a collision that could not be contained. What happens when a private heartbreak collides with public law? That was the question hanging in the air as Harry stared out the window, watching the world move on as if nothing had changed, while his own life felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. Because once the DNA revelation escaped into public consciousness, it stopped being only an emotional crisis. It became something far more dangerous. It became legal. And law, unlike emotion, has no sympathy. Behind the scenes, teams were already mobilizing. Lawyers, advisors, crisis consultants. People whose job was not to feel, but to calculate. Not to grieve, but to protect assets, reputations, and futures. The kind of people who spoke in careful sentences and never raised their voices, yet held the power to reshape lives with a single clause or filing. Harry hadn't even slept when the first call came in. Not from the media, not from the palace, from legal counsel. "Harry," the voice said, measured and urgent. "We need to talk about exposure, custody implications, privacy rights, and what this means going forward." That was the moment it truly hit him. This wasn't just about trust. This wasn't just about betrayal. This wasn't just about identity. This could determine who had rights to his children. Let that sink in. Not emotionally. Legally. The word custody echoed in his mind like a gunshot. He hadn't even finished processing the idea that Archie and Lilibet might not be biologically his. And now someone was telling him that the law might not recognize him as their father at all. How do you prepare for that? How do you fight for children you've raised, loved, protected, when paperwork suddenly questions your standing? The legal teams moved fast. Too fast. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet again. Only this time the danger wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Documents. Definitions. Precedents. Cold, unfeeling things. Meghan sat beside him as the conversations unfolded, her posture calm, her expression controlled, but her eyes sharp. She understood immediately what was at stake. This wasn't about proving anything to the public. This was about securing the children's future, no matter what the headlines said. Lawyers began outlining scenarios. If the DNA results were challenged, what would that require? If they were confirmed, what legal recognition did Harry retain? Would parental rights be questioned? Could third parties intervene? Would the palace have standing? Could media disclosures complicate privacy protections? Each question landed like a blow. Harry felt himself drifting, the words blurring together, until one sentence snapped him back into focus. Once biological paternity is disputed, a lawyer said carefully, legal paternity can be challenged, depending on jurisdiction. Depending on jurisdiction. Two words that suddenly carried terrifying weight. Different countries. Different laws. Different interpretations of family. And Harry's life existed in all of them. The irony was brutal. For years, he had fought to escape royal systems, to carve out a private life, to protect his family from institutions that thrived on control. And now, in the moment he needed protection most, He found himself navigating an even colder system, one governed not by tradition, but by statutes and precedent. Megan leaned in then, her voice firm. "We're not reacting," she said. "We're planning." And she was right, because panic helps no one, and reaction creates mistakes. The legal teams began mapping strategies. Step 1. Verify everything. Independent testing. Chain of custody reviews. Expert consultations. Not because they doubted the science, but because in law, certainty must be reinforced. Step 2. Establish intent and role. Harry's involvement from birth. His name on records. His role in upbringing. His public and private acknowledgement as father. Step 3. Protect the children. Privacy injunctions. Restraining media access. Preemptive filings to block unauthorized disclosures. The goal wasn't to fight the truth. The goal was to protect the family. But even with strategy in place, the emotional toll was immense. Harry kept thinking, how did it come to this? How did it test? One decision, trigger a chain reaction that now involved courts, advisors, and legal frameworks that could decide the fate of his family. And then came the complication no one wanted to say out loud. What if someone else stepped forward? What if another claim emerged? What if this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a much deeper legal and personal conflict? Because in cases like this, once the door opens, it never closes quietly. The legal teams warned them gently, but clearly. If this escalates, one advisor said, others may feel empowered to insert themselves into the narrative. Harry felt a chill. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about exposure, about vulnerability, about forces beyond his control sensing opportunity. And while lawyers worked behind closed doors, the media outside continued to speculate wildly, often incorrectly, sometimes maliciously, fueling pressure that threatened to spill into courtrooms if not managed carefully. The line between public opinion and legal consequence was thinning by the hour. Harry realized something then. For the first time in his life, love alone wasn't enough. Love didn't file motions. Love didn't block subpoenas. Love didn't stop narratives from becoming legal arguments. And that realization hurt almost as much as the DNA results themselves. As night fell, the house grew quiet. Archie and Lilibet slept peacefully, unaware that their future was being debated in language they wouldn't understand for years, if ever. Harry stood outside their rooms longer than usual, watching, listening, memorizing, because a terrifying thought had begun to form in his mind. What if the next battle wasn't emotional or public, but legal? And what if the law didn't see him the way his children did? But what came next would force Harry to confront the most painful question yet, one that had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with identity. And once that question was asked, there would be no turning back.